Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. It is the 15th of February, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. Do that online, do it by the phone, do it on social media with Facebook and Twitter. Any way you like, as long as you're staying up to date with the weather for your community, that's what we're wanting to help you out with tonight. So thanks for watching Alaska Weather with us here. And anytime you have questions about what you see, whether it's real weather that you're having or the forecasted weather that you find online, you got a question about your own forecast or perhaps how to find some information that you've been looking for a while and just can't seem to put your finger on, let us know. You can do that easily by using the email here, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov, and perhaps someone in your village or community has a contact at the Weather Service. Just go ahead and ask them, and we'll be happy to help you find that information you're looking for, help you understand what you're seeing or experiencing. Here's a look at what's going on across most of Alaska right now. A large part of Alaska is just kind of seeing breezy and cold weather up north. But we do have a few hot spots of weather tonight, and that would be in the eastern Alaska range where we have a wind advisory in effect. Those winds there could gust up to about 60 miles per hour through some of the eastern Alaska range passes. It's going to be a south and southwesterly flow that'll be the strongest. That'll go through a good chunk of the overnight hours and into Thursday morning. A little bit further north, we're also dealing with wind across the south passes, maybe a winter weather advisory for the southern passes of the eastern Brooks Range. Probably talking about a half-mile visibility through some of these regions as we have a north wind blowing in, and gusty winds up to 50 miles per hour will be possible. If you want to call them gusties, that'll be fine too. I'll understand what you're talking about. But gusty winds coming out of the north around 50 miles per hour. Let's look out toward the Chukchi Coast and in the Kotzebue Sound region in the northern part of the Seward Peninsula. We're talking about a winter storm warning there, and this is mainly for blowing snow. There will be some additional wind through the region with north winds up to about 65 miles per hour, and with the falling snow in the area, there could be some periods of very localized blizzard conditions. The overall period from the rest of tonight and into tomorrow morning probably won't be that widespread for poor visibility, strong winds, and falling snow, but from time to time in a few spots it could be that bad. So be on your guard for visibility to drop off. The main threats are going to be that blowing snow and that gusty winds, as well as some dangerous wind chills. And then as you get out toward the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island, we're also talking about some dangerous conditions there as well. The winter storm warning will be in effect there for blowing snow, and again some localized blizzard conditions here. Up around the Kotzebue Sound region, the wind chill advisory will probably be an even bigger issue for a feels-like index of about 50 below. So be careful with the northerly winds blowing through that region. The Kuskokwim Delta also under a winter weather advisory there for additional snow and blowing snow as we go through the evening hours and overnight. So a lot going on the west coast and through some of our mountain passes in the east. Here is the weather setup. Low pressure is working south of the Alaska Peninsula now, and this core of low pressure that's moving across the North Pacific and very close to Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island is bringing in another slug of moisture to south central. One of those waves passed through today. You probably found that if you were driving or attempting to fly in or out of Anchorage earlier today. We also see a previous wave that's been working through southeast, another kind of remaining trail working its way through the central sections of the Panhandle earlier today, bringing a little bit of rain there and likely some higher terrain snowfall. Up north, a band of clouds still exists that's fairly bright. That means that's high-level cold cloud tops working through. and we saw some hit and miss snow showers with that and some flurries across the middle Tanana Valley. By and large, it looked like by this afternoon, a lot of the snow that was still falling was out across southwestern Alaska, and that's probably where we're going to continue to see those impacts across your villages in the YK Delta tonight, and that's why that winter weather advisory is posted for the Kuskokwim Delta through tonight and into tomorrow. Up across the Brooks Range, a lot of this air is moving through the region and being drawn through some of those restricted parts of the terrain, and that's how we get those northerly winds gusting through the eastern half of the Brooks Range tonight. Some of those winds, again, could be on the strong side, up to 50-mile-an-hour gusts as we go. And it's going to be blustery up across the North Slope, but a lot of the wind is also being channeled right through the Bering Strait, so the wind chill advisory around the Kotzebue Sound region and the Chukchi coast for readings that could be as cold as 50 below, and then that winter storm warning around St. Lawrence Island and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Here's a look at what's going on as we go ahead into the last 12 hours or so. You can see that overall flow is just spiraling around this zone of low pressure. And if you kind of pick the center point right here, let's say Sand Point's pretty close to it right now, it doesn't seem to move very much. As you'll see the jet stream here in just a minute, if you remember that that's our fast-moving river of air and the part that guides all the surface weather around, it's very disconnected from what we have here at the surface. In fact, it's well to the south. So everything we have here on the surface is just kind of doing its own thing. It's not really being pushed along or caught up in that main river of weather action. Here's a weather map, and cold front is moving inland across the Copper River Basin and across parts of southeast. There's our little pocket of rain across places like, looks like Petersburg, Wrangell probably got some light rainfall today. Around Prince William Sound late this afternoon, still seeing some snow across the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and western Prince William Sound. Out across the west and southwestern part of the state, snow was still falling there all the way from Amonuk to Nunivak Island, the YK Delta, and including areas like Bethel and Iliamna. There's our low pressure center at 964 millibars. Snow showers there on the Alaska Peninsula. Had some snow showers reported around the Seward Peninsula and the North Slope as well. And keep in mind, part of the reason we're getting this wind is that very tight pressure gradient between high and low pressure across the north and western sections of our state. As we get into tonight, high pressure across the Gulf will linger, and it's not terribly high. It's 997 millibars. Well, look at the low, though. The low across southern southeast is at 978 millibars. This is working its way into the Pacific Northwest, setting up another big wet weather event for the Northwest. So if you're traveling that way, keep your eyes on the weather in that direction. Periods of snow across south central and southwest again tonight. A lot of this will try and set up in kind of light fashion for many across the Kenai Peninsula. We have a more substantial surge, it looks like, that's going to work its way up from Thursday night and into Friday morning across the Cook Inlet region. So anything we see tonight looks to be pretty light and scattered at best. Low pressure just south and west of Kodiak Island will keep some warm air on its east side. That will probably bring some rain closer to the Kodiak coastline. Everything to the west is cold enough over Bristol Bay for snow. And high pressure across the northern parts of the Canadian provinces there will help to channel a lot of wind across northern and interior Alaska. Notice around the Tanana Valley, it looks like flurries and low clouds, and some of that should clear up as we get into tonight. As we get into Thursday, high pressure sits just north of Yakutat around western Canada and the Alcan border at 994 millibars. Again, not a very strong high pressure center. But just to the west, we have kind of a mediocre low, but it is enough to get that snow going. And this should grab into another slug of moisture and move that up across Kodiak Island, the southern parts of the Kenai Peninsula by Thursday night, and by Friday, it could be working into the Anchorage Bowl area, as well as Palmer and Wasilla, and up into the Susitna Valley. Now what you'll notice if you look eastward is right now it looks like a relatively dry stretch for parts of southeast. There will be some clouds in the region, probably will squeeze out a shower. But notice the high pressure ridge sneaks all the way into the eastern Gulf, and that could dry things out and slow things down a little bit as we look at Thursday in southeast. Out across the west, we still have cold air pouring southward, and that frontal boundary is the leading edge of that as that slowly works its way southward. And there's going to be an opportunity for the eastern and central Brooks Range to see some snow and certainly some wind. So wind chills, poor visibility, occasional snow, and probably some drifting snow as a result of that wind there. So some things to keep in mind if you've got some travel plans. Here's Friday. Low pressure moves up to Cook Inlet again, so we're a little concerned about the track of this and who's going to get snow with that across South Central. So if you're on the road system, say from Talkeetna southward, there's a chance that you're going to get some accumulating snow, especially west of the Parks Highway and around the Anchorage region, and then especially from Kenai to Homer. This looks like a good setup for snow for you. So perhaps if you're mushing and doing a little practice there, that might be just what you're looking for. Snow showers up across the interior of the Panhandle and the higher terrain there. And then out across the coast, probably rain showers. And some of that will spread in across the outer coast for southeast as we get into Friday. And Juneau, kind of right there on that line with the rain and snow. Snow showers out across the central chain and out across the western interior and the lower and middle Yukon Valley, all the way up north into the central Brooks Range and some of the passes there. And the Kobuk and Noatak Valleys probably looking at snow as well. So a lot going on. Temperature-wise today, 40s in southeast. South Central made it into the lower 30s and above freezing for many. 19 in Fairbanks, 9 in Fort Yukon. The North Slope, different story. Anywhere from 15 to 25 below in some cases. Kotzebue Sound temperatures 5 to 10 below, 6 in Nome. Unalakleet was 8, McGrath 22, Bethel 16 degrees, Lake Iliamna 32. The Alaska Peninsula was back in the 20s and 30s. The Pribilofs, teens and 20s today and 30s for the chain. Dutch Harbor in Unalaska is 34. Overnight lows back in the teens to mid-20s for South Central. Kodiak 33. Southeast in the 20s and 30s. The interior single digits, but single digits, that's mild for you, right? Anywhere from 20 to 30 below for the North Slope. Kotzebue Sound and Kotzebue itself in the mid-teens below zero. 11 below for Nome. Looks like about 17 above for McGrath. Actually, that's 2 above for McGrath. 17 above for places like Sparivon and down toward Russian Mission, a little bit colder. 20 for King Salmon and Dillingham, and 20s for the Alaska Peninsula and the central chain for low temperatures. High temps tomorrow back in the 30s. Bristol Bay temps in the upper 20s. Single digits to low teens for Bethel and the Kuskokwim Delta. 0 in Unalakleet, 3 below in Nome and Savunga, 16 below in Barrow, 8 above in Fort Yukon. Low 20s for Fairbanks, and low 30s for most of the Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet region. Southeast, you're looking at highs tomorrow back in the low 40s again. On to flying weather. Expect IFR conditions for a large chunk of the North Slope in the morning. Most of your northern passes all the way out to Norton Sound, Nunivak Island, and the Pribilofs. IFR for areas west of the Cook Inlet and into Prince William Sound, and including northern parts of Kodiak Island. Southeast, you'll start out with at least a little bit of VFR across the interior. That should only improve throughout the day for most of South Central and Southwest, improving visibility for many of your passes, but notice IFR lingers across the western Alaska Range and also across some of the northern Brooks Range, MVFR for most of the north coast. So your pass conditions, we expect to see a start at IFR for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, trending toward MVFR as the day goes on. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see a trend toward IFR, so conditions should worsen as we go. Rainy Pass will likely start at MVFR, but look for lowered ceilings and visibility as we go through the day. Windy Pass looking for improvements toward VFR. On your Thursday, Isabel Pass, also expected to lean toward VFR as the day goes on. Mentasta Pass right now looks pretty good at VFR. Tanita Pass, VFR conditions expected there. Portage Pass will head over toward IFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass looking for improvements after a little bit more of a murky start, let's say, for your Thursday. Freezing levels, no surprises here. We've got a lot of cold air in place. The surface freezing lines just south of the Aleutians and stretches over the central part of the Panhandle with warm air aloft, only at 2,000 feet, reaching over Haida Gwaii by this time tomorrow. The icing potential is light to isolated moderate right now. There will probably be some isolated increases to maybe occasional moderate across South Central in the coming days. So pay attention to this area as more moisture is being pumped into South Central. Right now levels stretch from about 3,000 to 4,000 feet above the surface, again for light to isolated moderate. Here's the jet stream. Remember how I said that River Rivera was south of the region? It's well south of the region, and that main steering current of weather has pretty much removed Alaska from any major weather action. However, it's allowing those surface features to gradually just kind of linger across the north and western Gulf. So as they go, that's where they'll go. They'll kind of make up their own minds and steer their own way until the jet stream takes a big jog north or south. At 9,000 feet, you can see that pretty steady northerly draw working down the west coast and into the central and western chain, wrapping into low pressure across southwest with a general southerly flow across most of the interior and the Gulf Coast. A southwesterly flow remains light across southeast, and at 3,000 feet, northwesterlies come into the mix, about 10 to 25 for southeast. Winds are fairly light across the Gulf, coming in at a southerly direction for most of south central, 25 knots closer to the coast, the interior about 10 knots or so. And our northerlies across the west coast remain unchanged, anywhere from about 20 to 30 knots from north-northeast. Turbulence potential, though, is increasing across the west coast below 5,000 feet. Watch for occasional chop there. Below 4,000 feet out across St. Matthew and down to the Pribilofs. and below 4,000 to 10,000 feet across south central. Remember, there will be some much stronger winds through those passes where wind advisories are in effect, and below 10,000 feet, watch for some chop across the central and southern parts of the outer Panhandle coast. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Thoman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern, we have computer models forecasting it, we've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time. And if you ever want to know any weather history about Alaska, it's in Rick's brain. He's an amazing encyclopedia of knowledge for Alaska weather. Pretty cool stuff. Here's a look at Southeast, and you can see winds are going to be pretty light across the inside. For the inside waters, 15 knots generally from the north and northwest. Across the Clarion Strait, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea there. The outer coast, some changes. We've got easterlies up north and then more of a north and westerly flow working down the coast, 20 to 30 knots with seas ranging from 10 to about 12 feet or so. By Friday, we start to pick up that southerly component again. South and southeasterly winds on the inside, 10 to 15 knots. Small seas, northerlies in the Lynn Canal, of course, and that southwesterly onshore flow develops. Still light, about 10 to 15 knots with seas from 9 to about 10 feet from north to south. 20 knots, though, up around the northern part of the Gulf. As we get into Thursday in south central, easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. We get into 12 to 15-foot seas as you get into the north and western Gulf. Across the Cook Inlet region, 25 knots. There's a pretty decent little but thin sliver of high concentration ice that's still snaking its way down south. That's going to continue. Look for southeasterlies west of the Barrens up to 30 knots and southerlies across the Shelikof Strait, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. But as we work in more of these southerly winds over the next several days, you'll notice that we start to kind of chip away at that leading edge of ice. So we've got variable winds west of the Barren Islands as we get into Friday, but that southerly flow starts to pick up a little bit more across the north and western Gulf, so that will add more warmth and probably erode that leading edge of ice across the Cook Inlet. Up north, northeasterlies in the northern Cook Inlet at 10 knots, westerlies across the Shelikof Strait, and we'll keep our easterly flow across Prince William Sound 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula and inside Bristol Bay we go. Northwesterlies on the Bering Sea side, 25 knots with a 7-foot sea down the coast, and west and northwesterlies across the Pacific coast, 9 to 14-foot seas there by Friday. Winds diminish somewhat, 15 to 20 knots in all areas. Westerlies from Castle Cape to Chignik, and north and northwesterlies from Bristol Bay and down the Bering Sea side and the Pacific coast, with seas ranging from about 5 to 6 feet. Across the Aleutians, 15 to 20 knots should do the trick in just about all areas. North and easterly winds for the Bering Sea coast out west, 20 knots from the north and east with a 10-foot sea. And across the Pacific, 10 to 15 knots with a 6 to 9-foot sea on Thursday. By Friday, north and easterly winds pick up a little bit more, 15 to 20 knots, a weak westerly wind south of Nikolsky to Unalaska with a 6-foot sea. Out west, Kiska and Attu, 7 to 8-foot seas there on a 15 to 20 knot wind from the north and east. Across the west coast, due northerlies there, 30 to 35. Look for 35 knots around St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island on the south side, 30 knots with a 10-foot sea. On the north side, the ice is already wrapping around the island slowly and surely there, so watch for heavy freezing spray on the south side near that open water. 25 knots from the Kuskokwim Delta all the way out toward the Pribilovs, northerlies. 25 knots there with an 8-foot sea. By Friday, that shifts to more of a northeasterly flow at 20 knots. And it looks like in the next several days, probably 3 to 4 days out or so, that ice edge will probably be about 30 to 40 nautical miles to the north and east of St. Paul. We'll start watching for strips. Your reports certainly help. Across the north coast, northerlies 10 knots there, the northeast flow in the Beaufort Sea coast, and stronger winds out across the Chukchi, 30 knots there over the ice on Thursday, and 20 to 25 by Friday, diminishing there. We'll keep those northeasterly winds across the Beaufort Sea coast from Kaktovik to Barrow at around 10 knots for the end of the week. Recapping tonight's weather, there's a winter weather advisory for the Kuskokwim Delta. Watch for snow and blowing snow as you get up into some of the passes there. Poor visibility is possible. A winter storm warning for St. Lawrence Island and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, and a wind chill advisory for the Kotzebue Sound region and Chukchi Coast. Stay warm and dry, folks. Have a good night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.